Yosef's body slammed into the small figure of the boy, sending both of them crashing through the glass entrance of Romano's restaurant as chaos erupted around them. The child's Spider-Man backpack flew from his shoulder and skidded across the polished marble floor in a blur of red and blue. Yosef felt the impact tear through her abdomen, a searing heat that spread like wildfire beneath her ribs as gunshots echoed through the downtown street. "Stay down," Yosef gasped, her voice barely a whisper as she covered the boy's dark hair with both hands. "Do not move, sweetheart. Do not move." The staccato burst of automatic gunfire rang out again. The screech of tires sliced across the pavement outside. Yosef had only planned to finish her double shift and walk the 3 blocks home to her tiny studio apartment, where the rent was 2 weeks overdue. She had only smiled at a sweet little boy with wide brown eyes who had been clutching a to-go bag of pasta. And now it had come to this, a drive-by shooting in the heart of the city during dinner rush. The gunfire stopped as suddenly as it had begun. The space collapsed into a tense, unnatural silence broken only by the sound of car alarms wailing in the distance. Yosef slowly lifted her head, her vision blurring at the edges as she looked down. Blood was seeping through her white uniform, spreading across the fabric in a dark crimson stain that seemed to grow with every heartbeat. No car in sight, no sign of the well-dressed man in the expensive suit who had been standing beside the boy moments earlier. No one who looked like the child's father or guardian. "Dad." The boy's voice was tiny and trembling like a broken breath. He could not be more than 7 years old. And Yosef's stomach clenched tight, not from the bullet wound, but from the realization that this child was about to watch a stranger die trying to save him. In that instant, as her strength began to fail and darkness crept into the corners of her vision, Yosef understood that she had become the only barrier between this boy and a trauma that would haunt him forever. Yosef was still lying on the cold marble floor, her arms wrapped around the boy even as her grip weakened, as if loosening her hold for even a second would mean she had failed. She felt his frantic heartbeat pressed against her shoulder, tasted copper on her tongue, and smelled the acrid burn of gunpowder mixed with the rich scent of marinara sauce drifting from the kitchen. The screams had begun to fade now, replaced by hurried footsteps of restaurant staff emerging from behind overturned tables and the distant wail of sirens growing louder with each passing second. Yet Yosef could not let go. She had to be sure the child was safe before she allowed herself to surrender to the pain. "What is your name?" she asked softly, forcing her voice to remain steady though her hands were slick with her own blood. The boy lifted his head, his large, dark eyes filled with overwhelming terror and confusion. "Renly," he answered in a choked voice, then repeated a single question, weak as a fading breath. "Where's my dad? I want my dad." Yosef glanced around the restaurant through the shattered glass doors. Patrons were slowly crawling out from beneath tables. Some people were already holding up their phones to record the carnage. Others were helping wounded victims scattered across the sidewalk outside. But no one came toward her. No one searched for Renly. There was no man in the expensive suit whom Yosef had seen standing beside the child just minutes earlier when she had arrived to cover the evening shift. A hostess with mascara running down her face stumbled over, her voice shaking. "Oh my God, you're hurt. Someone call an ambulance." "The boy," Yosef managed to say, her voice growing weaker. "Find his father. Find whoever he came with." The hostess looked around frantically. "There was a man. I think he went outside to take a call right before the shooting started. I don't know where he went." Yosef looked back at Renly, who was clutching her blood-stained uniform with tear-filled eyes, his small hands trembling. "Do you remember your father's number? Can you tell me his name?" Renly shook his head, his voice breaking. "Cassidy Clay. My dad is Cassidy Clay. He told me to wait inside if anything happened, but I was too scared. I didn't know what to do." The name struck through Yosef's fading consciousness like a lightning bolt. Even in her deteriorating state, she recognized it. Cassidy Clay was not just any father. He was a name whispered in back rooms and dark alleys, a man whose influence stretched through every corner of the city's underworld, and she had just thrown herself in front of a bullet meant for his son. Her vision swam, and she felt her body growing cold despite the summer heat radiating from the pavement outside. "It's all right," she whispered, her voice barely audible now. "You did very well. You were very brave, Renly." Just then, a low, powerful roar sounded outside that seemed to make the broken glass in the doorway tremble. An engine thundered, brakes shrieked violently, and the tense atmosphere was torn apart by heavy footsteps and a deep voice filled with barely controlled rage. "Renly." Yosef turned her head with the last of her strength, and for the first time, she saw the man who would change her life forever. He burst through the shattered entrance from the glossy black SUV that had just screeched to a halt outside, moving as though the world around him no longer existed. He wore a perfectly tailored black suit that seemed untouched by the chaos, and his presence commanded the entire space. His dark hair was slicked back, revealing sharp features and a face marked with tattoos that spoke of a life lived on the edge of violence. His storm-gray eyes swept the scene with the cold precision of someone who had seen too much death, and when they landed on his son, something cracked in that carefully controlled expression. But Renly reacted immediately. The boy tried to pull away from Yosef's weakening embrace and stumbled toward the man, crying out with desperate relief. "Dad!" Cassidy Clay dropped to his knees on the blood-slicked marble and caught his son in his arms, pressing the boy tightly to his chest, his large tattooed hand nearly covering Renly's small head. "Are you hurt? Did they touch you? Tell me you're all right." His voice was rough, as if he were holding back an explosion of emotion. "I'm okay, Dad. She saved me." Renly pointed back at Yosef, who was now struggling to keep her eyes open, her breathing shallow and labored. Cassidy's gaze snapped to her immediately, not with gratitude as she might have expected, but with a look so intense it felt like a physical force. His eyes moved from her face to the spreading pool of blood beneath her, to her hand still reaching toward his son as if to make sure Renly stayed safe even now. Something shifted in his expression, a recognition of a debt that could never be repaid with mere words. He was beside her in 3 strides, his presence overwhelming as he knelt down and pressed his hand firmly against her wound, applying pressure with the practiced efficiency of someone who had dealt with gunshot wounds before. "Stay with me," he commanded, his voice no longer cold but urgent. "Do you hear me? You do not get to die, not after saving him." Yosef tried to speak, to tell him she had only done what anyone would do, but the words would not come. Her vision was darkening, and she felt herself slipping away despite the pressure of his hands trying to keep her alive. "Who are you?" Cassidy demanded, his face close to hers, his eyes searching hers as if trying to anchor her to consciousness through sheer force of will. "Yosef," she managed to whisper, her voice barely audible. "Yosef Rosario. I'm just a waitress. I was just—" "You threw yourself in front of bullets meant for my son," Cassidy interrupted, his voice dropping to something quieter but no less powerful. "That makes you more than just a waitress." The piercing wail of ambulance sirens cut through the air as paramedics rushed in with a stretcher and medical equipment. They tried to move Cassidy aside, but he stayed where he was, his hand still pressed against her wound until they physically had to remove him to begin treatment. As the paramedics worked frantically to stabilize her, Yosef felt herself being lifted onto the stretcher. Through the haze of pain and approaching unconsciousness, she heard Cassidy's voice, low and absolute, speaking to someone on his phone. "I want every camera feed from this block. I want to know who did this and where they are within the hour. And get Dr. Ramos to the hospital now. Tell him to clear his schedule." Then his face was above hers again as they wheeled her toward the ambulance, and he said something that cut through the fog in her mind with startling clarity. "You saved my son's life, Yosef Rosario. That means your life now belongs to me. I will not let you die. And when you wake up, I will make you a promise that I intend to keep." The last thing Yosef saw before the darkness claimed her completely was Cassidy Clay's tattooed hand gently squeezing hers, and the look in his eyes that told her everything had changed in ways she could not yet understand. "My mom thinks I won't be able to get to 1,000 subscribers. Let's prove her wrong. By subscribing to our channel, like and comment where you are watching from. Your support keeps us going. If you are new to our channel, 1 subscriber at a time. Let's get to 1,000 subscribers. Thank you so much for your support." The steady beep of the heart monitor was the first sound Yosef registered as consciousness slowly returned. Her eyelids felt impossibly heavy, and when she finally managed to open them, harsh fluorescent lights made her wince. Everything hurt, a deep, aching pain that radiated from her abdomen and seemed to pulse through her entire body with each heartbeat. Where was she? Hospital. The sterile smell, the white walls, the IV line in her arm, all confirmed it. She tried to move, and immediately regretted it as pain lanced through her torso. "Don't move." The voice came from her right, deep and commanding. Yosef turned her head slowly and felt her breath catch. Cassidy Clay sat in a chair beside her hospital bed, still wearing the black suit from the shooting, though it was now creased and stained with blood. Her blood, she realized. His tattooed hands were clasped together, elbows resting on his knees as he leaned forward, watching her with an intensity that made her feel exposed. Behind him, Two large men in dark suits stood near the door, their eyes constantly scanning the hallway beyond. Guards. How long? Yosef's voice came out as a hoarse whisper. 18 hours since the surgery, Cassidy replied. The bullet punctured your small intestine and nicked your liver. You lost a lot of blood. The doctors said you're lucky to be alive. Lucky? The word felt wrong somehow. Renly? She managed to ask. Something softened in Cassidy's expression, though his eyes remained hard as steel. He's safe. Not a scratch on him because of you. Yosef closed her eyes briefly, relief washing over her. Good. That's good. When she opened them again, Cassidy had moved closer, his face now just a few feet from hers. You have questions. I can see them in your eyes. But before you ask them, I need you to understand something. She waited, her heart rate increasing, which made the monitor beep faster. The men who tried to kill my son saw your face, Cassidy said, his voice dropping to something that sounded almost gentle, but with an edge that suggested violence barely contained. They know you shielded him. They know you are a witness to their failure. That makes you a target, Yosef Rosario. Fear coiled in her stomach. I didn't see their faces. I can't identify anyone. That won't matter to them, Cassidy said flatly. In my world, loose ends get eliminated, and you became a loose end the moment you stepped between those bullets and my son. Your world? Yosef repeated, though she already knew what he meant. I didn't ask to be part of your world. I just wanted to help a child. And that choice, that one selfless moment, changed everything. Cassidy reached out and took her hand, his tattooed fingers wrapping around hers with surprising gentleness. I made you a promise when you were unconscious, but I'm going to make it again now that you can hear me. He leaned closer, his gray eyes boring into hers with absolute certainty. You saved the only person in this world who matters to me. You were willing to die for a child you didn't know, asking nothing in return. That kind of courage, that kind of goodness, is rare, and I will not let the people who tried to kill my son take your life as payment for your bravery. I don't understand, Yosef whispered, though part of her was beginning to. From this moment forward, you are under my protection, Cassidy said, his voice carrying the weight of an unbreakable vow. No one will touch you. No one will harm you. And anyone who tries will answer to me. That is my promise, Yosef Rosario. I owe you a debt that can never be fully repaid, but I will spend the rest of my life trying. Yosef stared at him, her mind racing despite the pain medication making her thoughts fuzzy. This man, this dangerous man whose reputation preceded him, was telling her that her life had become entangled with his because she had acted on instinct to save a child. What if I don't want your protection? She asked quietly, though she already suspected the answer. Cassidy's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes, regret, perhaps, or recognition of the cage he was building around her for her own survival. Then you would be dead within a week. The people who came after Renly don't leave witnesses alive, and I cannot allow that to happen. The finality in his voice made it clear this was not a request or an offer. It was a declaration. Yosef closed her eyes, feeling the weight of what her single act of heroism had cost her. Her freedom, her anonymity, her simple life of double shifts and overdue rent. All of it was gone, replaced by something she could not yet fully comprehend. When she opened her eyes again, Cassidy was still watching her, waiting. What happens now? She asked, her voice small and tired. Cassidy squeezed her hand once, a gesture that somehow felt both protective and possessive. Now you heal, and when you're strong enough, you come home with me, to where I can keep you safe, to where Renly has been asking for you every hour since the shooting. Home with you? The words felt foreign on her tongue. The Clay estate, Cassidy confirmed. It's the only place secure enough to protect you from the people who want you dead, and it's where my son is waiting to thank the woman who saved his life. Yosef felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes, though she couldn't say if they were from pain, fear, or the overwhelming realization that her life would never be the same. I don't belong in your world, Mr. Clay. Cassidy, he corrected her gently, and you belong wherever I say you belong now, because in saving my son, you became mine to protect. That is not negotiable. The possessiveness in his words should have frightened her, but instead, she heard something else beneath it, a desperate need to repay an unpayable debt, to protect someone who had shown courage in a moment when it mattered most. I don't even know you, she whispered. Cassidy's expression softened, just slightly, and for the first time, she saw something human beneath the dangerous exterior. No, you don't, but you will. And I promise you, Yosef Rosario, that I will prove worthy of the sacrifice you made for my family." As Yosef lay there, her body broken but alive, holding the hand of a man who represented everything she had always tried to avoid, she understood with startling clarity that her story had taken a turn into something far more dangerous and complicated than she could have ever imagined. And Cassidy Clay, the man whose son she had saved, was not going to let her walk away from it. Not now. Not ever. The pain was what woke her, a deep throbbing ache that radiated from somewhere beneath her ribs and spread through her entire body like poison. Yosef's eyelids fluttered open, and the world swam into focus slowly, reluctantly, as if her consciousness was being dragged back from somewhere dark and peaceful where nothing hurt. White ceiling tiles, the antiseptic smell of industrial cleaner mixed with something medicinal, the steady beep of machines monitoring her existence in mechanical increments. Hospital. She was in a hospital. Yosef tried to move, and immediately regretted it. Fire lanced through her abdomen, forcing a strangled gasp from her throat. Her hand instinctively moved toward the source of the pain, but something stopped her. Not something. Someone. "I wouldn't do that if I were you." The voice came from her right, low and measured, with an edge that suggested its owner was accustomed to being obeyed without question. She turned her head slowly, carefully, and found herself staring into storm-gray eyes that held hers with an intensity that made her forget about the pain for a moment. Cassidy Clay sat in a chair that had been pulled close to her bedside, so close that his knees nearly touched the metal frame. His tattooed hands were wrapped around hers, his fingers surprisingly gentle for someone who radiated such barely contained violence. He looked different from the man who had burst into the restaurant. His black suit jacket was gone, draped over the back of his chair, leaving him in a white dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows, revealing more intricate tattoos that disappeared beneath the fabric. His dark hair was no longer perfectly slicked back but fell slightly across his forehead, as if he had run his hands through it too many times. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and a day's worth of stubble covered his jaw. He looked like a man who had not slept since the shooting. Behind him, two massive figures stood near the door like statues carved from stone and dressed in expensive suits that did nothing to hide their obvious purpose. Guards, armed, if the subtle bulges beneath their jackets were any indication. Beyond them, through the partially open door, Yosef could see more men positioned in the hallway, their eyes constantly scanning for threats that apparently warranted this level of security in a hospital. "How long?" Yosef's voice came out as a rasp, her throat dry and raw as if she had been screaming. 36 hours since you came out of surgery," Cassidy replied, his thumb unconsciously stroking the back of her hand. 12 hours since you started showing signs of waking. The doctors said you would pull through, but I needed to see it for myself. 36 hours. A day and a half of her life. Gone. "Renly," she managed to say, the boy's name coming to her lips before any questions about her own condition. "Is he safe?" Cassidy interrupted, and something in his expression shifted. A crack in the carefully maintained mask. "Not a single scratch on him because you put yourself between him and those bullets. The doctors removed one 9mm round from your lower abdomen. It went through your small intestine and grazed your liver. You lost enough blood that they had to give you 3 transfusions during surgery." The clinical details should have frightened her, but Yosef found herself more focused on the relief that flooded through her at the confirmation that Renly was unharmed. She had done what she set out to do. The boy was alive. "I need you to understand something. Yosef Rosario." Cassidy leaned forward, his face now just inches from hers, his voice dropping to something quieter but infinitely more dangerous. "That shooting was not random. Those men came for my son. They knew exactly who he was, exactly when he would be at that restaurant, and exactly how to get to him." Fear coiled in Yosef's stomach, cold and sharp. "Why would anyone want to hurt a child?" "Because he is my son," Cassidy said flatly, his jaw tightening. "Because hurting him is the only way to hurt me. Because in the world I inhabit, there are men who believe that killing a 7-year-old boy is an acceptable move in a game of power and territory." Yosef stared at him, seeing the rage burning behind his controlled exterior. The self-loathing that came with knowing his own existence had painted a target on his child's back. "The men who orchestrated this attack are named Vincent Moretti and his organization," Cassidy continued, his voice hardening with each word. "They failed to kill Renly, but they succeeded in something almost as problematic. They saw you. They saw your face clearly when you shielded my son and survived. Security footage shows one of the shooters pointing directly at you before they fled. The implications crashed over Yosef like ice water. They know who I am. They know what you did, Cassidy corrected. And in their world, witnesses do not get to walk away. You saved my son's life, which makes you a liability they will want to eliminate. You can identify the vehicle, the approximate time, the trajectory of their escape route. You are a loose end, Yosef. And Vincent Moretti does not leave loose ends. Yosef felt her heart rate climbing, heard it in the increasingly frantic beeping of the monitor beside her bed. This could not be real. She was a waitress who worked double shifts to pay off medical debt. She was nobody. How had her life become entangled in something so dangerous? I didn't see their faces, she said desperately, though she knew it would not matter. I can't identify anyone. I was just trying to help. I know. Cassidy's grip on her hand tightened, not painfully but firmly, as if anchoring her to something solid in a world that had suddenly become unstable. You acted on instinct and compassion, asking nothing in return. You threw yourself in front of bullets meant for a child you did not know, and you nearly died because of it. His voice cracked slightly on the last word, revealing something raw beneath the controlled exterior. You saved the only thing in this world that matters to me, Cassidy continued, his gray eyes boring into hers with an intensity that felt like a physical force. My son is alive because of you, and that means I am now responsible for your life in return. I don't understand what that means, Yosef whispered, though part of her was beginning to. Cassidy released her hand only to reach up and cup her face gently, his calloused palm warm against her cheek. It means I am making you a vow, Yosef Rosario. From this moment forward, you are under my protection. No one will harm you. No one will even get close enough to try. I will use every resource, every connection, every ounce of power I have built to ensure that you stay alive. Because I saved Renly, Yosef said quietly. Because you were willing to die for him, Cassidy corrected, his voice dropping to something that sounded almost reverent. That kind of courage, that kind of selfless love for a stranger, is rarer than you know, and I will be damned if I let the animals who tried to kill my son take your life as punishment for your kindness. Tears pricked at the corners of Yosef's eyes, though she could not say if they were from fear, relief, or the overwhelming weight of what he was telling her. What happens now? Cassidy's expression softened, just slightly, and for a moment, she saw the father beneath the dangerous man. Now you heal, and when you are strong enough to leave this hospital, you come with me, to my home, where I can protect you properly, where Renly has been asking for you every waking hour since the shooting. I have a life, Yosef protested weakly. An apartment, a job, you have debts, Cassidy interrupted gently but firmly. Medical bills from your mother's illness that you have been drowning under for 2 years. A landlord who is threatening eviction. 2 jobs that barely keep you fed. That life was killing you slowly, Yosef. What I am offering is a chance at something different. The fact that he knew these intimate details about her should have been terrifying, but Yosef was too exhausted, too overwhelmed to process the implications. This is not a request, Cassidy added, his voice returning to that tone of absolute authority. This is a vow I am making to you. You are mine to protect now, and I always keep my promises. The Clay estate was not what Yosef had expected, though she was not entirely sure what she had been expecting. Perhaps something ostentatious and cold, dripping with the kind of wealth that screamed rather than whispered. Instead, as the black SUV passed through iron gates that closed behind them with an ominous finality, she found herself staring at something that looked more like a fortified sanctuary than a home. The mansion sprawled across manicured grounds, surrounded by stone walls topped with security cameras that tracked their approach. The architecture was elegant but understated, Mediterranean style with terracotta roof tiles and ivy climbing the pale stone walls. It should have felt welcoming, but the armed men positioned at strategic points throughout the property told a different story. This was not just a home. It was a fortress designed to keep the world out and its occupants safe, or trapped, depending on how one chose to look at it. Yosef sat in the back seat beside Cassidy, her hand resting on the bandages hidden beneath the loose black dress someone had brought to the hospital for her. The doctors had cleared her for discharge with strict instructions for rest and medication, and Cassidy had wasted no time arranging her transfer. She had not been given a choice in the matter, though his hand had remained gentle on her elbow as he helped her into the vehicle, as if he understood the cage he was building around her even as he insisted it was for her protection. The car stopped in front of a set of double doors that opened before they could reach them. A woman in her 50s with silver-streaked dark hair pulled into a neat bun emerged, her face warm but her eyes sharp with the kind of intelligence that missed nothing. She wore simple black slacks and a cream blouse, and moved with the efficiency of someone who ran this household with absolute competence. "Mrs. Rosario," the woman said as Cassidy helped Yosef from the car, her accent holding traces of something Spanish. "I am Maria Santos, the head housekeeper. Welcome to the Clay estate. I have prepared the guest suite on the second floor for you, as Mr. Clay requested." Guest. The word felt like a polite fiction, but Yosef nodded gratefully. "Thank you, and please, just Yosef." Maria's expression softened slightly, something maternal flickering in her eyes as she took in Yosef's pale face and the way she moved carefully, protecting her injured side. "Come, you should be resting, not standing in the heat. I will show you to your room." Cassidy's hand remained at the small of Yosef's back as they entered the mansion, a constant reminder of his presence and his claim on her safety. The interior was beautiful in an understated way. All warm, hardwood floors and cream-colored walls decorated with art that looked expensive but not cold. It felt lived in, which surprised her. Somehow she had expected a mafia boss's home to feel more like a museum than a place where a child actually grew up. They climbed a sweeping staircase, and Yosef tried not to show how much the exertion cost her. Maria opened a door at the end of a long hallway, revealing a suite that was larger than Yosef's entire studio apartment had been. A four-poster bed dominated the space, dressed in soft gray linens. French doors opened onto a private balcony overlooking gardens that stretched toward the estate's walls. A separate sitting area held comfortable furniture, and two additional doors presumably led to a bathroom and closet. "I will bring you some tea and something light to eat," Maria said, already moving toward the door. "The doctor's instructions are on the nightstand, along with your medications. If you need anything at all, there is a phone beside the bed. Press 1, and it will reach me directly." As Maria left, a new figure appeared in the doorway, and Yosef felt the temperature in the room drop several degrees. The man was massive, easily 6'4", with the build of someone who could break bones as easily as breathing. His face was all hard angles and cold calculation, his dark eyes assessing her with the kind of professional detachment that made her skin crawl. Unlike Cassidy's controlled danger, this man was a weapon barely sheathed. "Dominic Ferraro," Cassidy introduced, his tone shifting to something more formal. "My head of security. Dominic, this is Yosef Rosario." Dominic's nod was slight, perfunctory. "Miss Rosario, I need to make something very clear to you. This estate is secure, but only if protocols are followed. You do not leave the grounds without Mr. Clay or myself accompanying you. You do not open windows or step onto balconies without checking with security first. You do not communicate with anyone outside this property without clearance. These rules are not negotiable." Yosef bristled despite her exhaustion. "So I am a prisoner." "You are alive," Dominic corrected, his voice flat and matter-of-fact. "Vincent Moretti has people everywhere. Phone companies, delivery services, restaurants, hospitals. If he learns where you are and that you are unprotected, you will be dead within hours. These measures are in place to ensure that does not happen." "Dominic," Cassidy's voice held a note of warning. "Give us the room." Dominic's jaw tightened, but he obeyed immediately, closing the door behind him with a soft click that somehow felt as final as the estate gates closing. Cassidy turned to Yosef, his expression softening. "He is right about the danger, even if his delivery lacks warmth. This is not about controlling you. This is about keeping you alive long enough to eliminate the threat." "How long will that take?" Yosef asked quietly. "I do not know," Cassidy admitted, and the honesty in his voice made her believe him. "Days, weeks, possibly months. Moretti is careful and well protected, but I promise you, this situation will not be permanent." Before Yosef could respond, a small voice called out from the hallway. "Dad, is she here? Did she really come?" Cassidy's entire demeanor transformed, the dangerous edge melting away as he moved to the door and opened it. "She is here, son. But remember what we talked about. She is still healing, so we must be gentle." Renly appeared in the doorway, and Yosef felt her breath catch. The boy was small for 7, with dark hair that fell across his forehead and those same storm-gray eyes as his father. He wore dinosaur pajamas despite it being late afternoon, and his feet were bare against the hardwood floor. But it was the expression on his face that broke something in Yosef's chest, a mixture of hope and fear and desperate need that no child should have to carry. He stared at her, his hands twisting together nervously, and for a long moment, no one spoke. "Hi, Renly," Yosef said softly, offering him a gentle smile despite the pain radiating from her wound. "I am glad to see you are all right." Renly took a tentative step into the room, then another, his eyes never leaving her face. "You saved me," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The men were shooting, and you pushed me, and then there was blood, and I thought you were dead." "I am not dead," Yosef assured him, her heart aching at the trauma she could see written across his young face. "I am right here, and I am going to be fine." Cassidy watched the interaction with an intensity that suggested he was cataloging every word, every gesture, looking for something Yosef could not quite identify. The moment might have remained frozen in that careful politeness if nature had not intervened. Thunder rolled across the sky, deep and menacing, followed seconds later by a crack of lightning that lit up the room. Rain began to pelt against the windows, and Renly flinched violently, his small body going rigid with fear. Without thinking, Yosef opened her arms. "Come here, sweetheart. It is just a storm." She expected him to hesitate, to look to his father for permission, to maintain the careful distance that traumatized children often kept. Instead, Renly crossed the room in 3 running steps and climbed directly into her lap, his arms wrapping around her neck as he buried his face against her shoulder. Yosef gasped at the pressure against her healing wound, but immediately wrapped her arms around him, holding him close as his small body trembled. "You are safe," she murmured, rocking him slightly. "The storm cannot hurt you here, I promise." Over Renly's head, her eyes met Cassidy's, and what she saw there made her breath catch. The Mafia boss's carefully controlled mask had cracked completely, revealing something raw and vulnerable and desperately grateful. His son, who apparently had not let anyone hold him like this in who knew how long, had climbed into the arms of a virtual stranger and found comfort there. And in that moment, Yosef understood with perfect clarity that she was not just trapped in this gilded cage because Cassidy Clay wanted to repay a debt. She was trapped because Renly needed her, and despite everything, despite the danger and the loss of her freedom and the terrifying world she had been pulled into, Yosef found that she could not bring herself to push the frightened child away. The morning sun streamed through the French doors of Yosef's suite as she sat cross-legged on the floor, colored pencils scattered across the hardwood between her and Renly. 3 days had passed since her arrival at the estate, 3 days of healing flesh and watching a 7-year-old boy who carried silence like armor. He had not spoken a single word since that first afternoon when the storm had driven him into her arms. Not to her, not to Maria, not even to his father. Renly pushed a drawing across the floor toward her, his small fingers smudged with graphite. Yosef picked it up carefully, studying the image with the same attention she had given all the others. A house rendered in careful detail, a woman with long dark hair standing in a doorway, and a small boy holding her hand. The colors were muted, grays and browns and faded blues, as if the memory itself had lost its vibrancy. "Is this your mother?" Yosef asked softly. Renly nodded, his eyes fixed on the drawing rather than her face. "She was beautiful," Yosef continued, tracing the careful lines of the woman's face. "You drew her smile just right. I can tell she loved you very much." The boy's hands stilled, and for a moment, she thought he might speak. Instead, he reached for another piece of paper and began drawing again, this time with harder, more aggressive strokes. Yosef watched as dark shapes emerged, chaotic and violent. A car, broken glass, red everywhere, bleeding across the page like a wound that would not close. Her chest tightened, understanding dawning with cold clarity. Maria had told her bits and pieces over morning coffee, her voice low and careful. Renly's mother had been killed 2 years ago in a car bombing meant for Cassidy. The boy had been at school, spared from witnessing it, but the aftermath had stolen his voice as surely as the explosion had stolen his mother. Selective mutism, the doctors called it. Trauma manifesting as an inability to speak, even when he desperately wanted to. "Renly," Yosef said gently, setting aside the violent drawing and meeting his eyes. "What happened to your mother was not your fault, and it is okay if you cannot talk about it. But I want you to know that I am here, and I am listening, even to the things you cannot say out loud." He stared at her for a long moment, his gray eyes so much like his father's, filled with a pain no child should understand. Then, slowly, he moved closer until he was sitting beside her, his small shoulder pressed against hers in silent gratitude. They sat like that for a while, not speaking, just existing in the comfortable quiet that Yosef had learned to create for him. She had discovered early that Renly responded better to presence than to pressure, to gentle companionship rather than forced conversation. So she told him stories, endless stories about brave knights and clever foxes and ordinary people who did extraordinary things. She drew with him, matching his silence with her own, when words felt too heavy, and slowly, carefully, he had begun to trust her. The door to her suite opened, and Cassidy entered carrying a tray with lunch for both of them. He did this every day, personally bringing meals as if he did not have an entire household staff at his disposal. Yosef suspected it was his way of checking on his son without being too obvious about it, of inserting himself into these moments of healing without disrupting them. "How are we doing today?" Cassidy asked, setting the tray on the low table near the sitting area. His voice was different when he spoke to Renly, stripped of all the dangerous edges that defined him in the outside world. Here, with his son, he was just a father trying desperately to reach a child who had retreated behind walls of silence. Renly looked up at his father and made a gesture, 3 quick movements of his hands that Yosef had come to recognize as his makeshift sign language. Cassidy smiled, understanding immediately. "Good. I am glad you are drawing again. Your grandmother called this morning and asked if you would make her a picture of the garden. Do you think you could do that?" Renly nodded enthusiastically, already reaching for fresh paper. Cassidy's eyes met Yosef's over his son's head, and the gratitude there was profound and unguarded. In 3 days, she had given Renly something no therapist or doctor had managed, a safe space where his silence was accepted rather than something to be fixed. And Cassidy saw it, recognized it, treasured it in a way that made Yosef's heart ache. Later that evening, after Renly had been coaxed to bed with a story about dragons and the promise that Yosef would still be there in the morning, she found herself standing on the balcony despite Dominic's rules. The night air was cool against her skin, and the gardens below were peaceful in the moonlight. She heard the door to her suite open, but did not turn around. She knew who it was by the weight of his footsteps, the particular way he moved through space as if he owned it. "You should not be out here," Cassidy said, coming to stand beside her at the railing. "Dominic will have my head if he finds out I allowed it." "Then do not tell him," Yosef replied, surprising herself with the small smile that tugged at her lips. "I needed air. The walls were closing in." Cassidy was quiet for a moment, his profile sharp in the moonlight. "I know this is difficult. Being confined here, having your freedom taken from you through no fault of your own. If there was another way—" "There is not," Yosef interrupted gently. "You have made that clear, and I understand, even if I do not like it." He turned to look at her fully, his expression unreadable. "He has not stopped talking about you. In his own way, through his drawings and his gestures, you have reached him in a way I could not." "You are his father," Yosef said. "He loves you. I can see it in how he looks at you, how he lights up when you enter a room. But sometimes grief is easier to share with someone who was not there when the world fell apart." Cassidy's jaw tightened, and she realized her words had struck something deep. "I should have been there. The bomb was meant for me. She died because I was not careful enough, because I underestimated my enemies, because I brought danger into our lives. And you have been carrying that guilt ever since," Yosef observed quietly, "just as Renly has been carrying his own version of it. You both survived when she did not, and neither of you know how to forgive yourselves for that." He stared at her, and for a moment, she thought she had overstepped, pushed too far into wounds that were none of her business. But then his expression cracked, revealing something raw and human beneath the carefully maintained control. "How do you see these things?" he asked, his voice rough. "How do you look at us and understand what doctors and therapists could not?" "Because I know what it is like to lose someone and blame yourself for not saving them," Yosef admitted, her own grief rising to the surface. "My mother died owing more in medical bills than I could ever repay, and I worked myself to exhaustion trying. I held her hand as the cancer ate her alive, and I could not do anything to stop it. So I understand the guilt, the anger, the feeling that you should have been able to prevent the inevitable." Cassidy reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand in his. His tattooed fingers were warm and solid, anchoring. "I am sorry you carried that alone, and I am sorry you have had to carry your grief while being strong for Renly," Yosef replied. "It must be exhausting, being the monster the world expects while being the father your son needs." Something shifted in his expression, a crack in the foundation of the image he presented to the world. "You do not see me as a monster." It was not a question, but Yosef answered anyway. "I see a man who loves his son enough to bring a stranger into his home because that stranger makes his child feel safe. I see a father who personally delivers lunch every day just to spend a few minutes watching his son heal." I see someone capable of terrible things protecting the people he loves from an even more terrible world. She paused, choosing her words carefully. You are dangerous, Cassidy Clay, but you are not a monster. Monsters do not kneel on marble floors and beg strangers not to die. His grip on her hand tightened, not painfully but desperately, as if she had given him something he had not known he needed. Stay, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Not because I am demanding it, not because you owe me anything, but because he needs you. Because somehow, in 3 days, you have become essential to my son's healing. Yosef looked up at him, at this complicated, dangerous man who was showing her pieces of himself he probably showed no one else, and felt something shift in her own chest. She was supposed to be the prisoner here, the protected witness held against her will. But standing in the moonlight with his hand wrapped around hers and his guard completely down, she realized the truth was far more complicated than that. I will stay, she promised, and meant it. The package arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a courier service that had somehow passed through 3 security checkpoints without raising immediate suspicion. Yosef was in the sunroom with Renly, watching him carefully arrange painted rocks into patterns on the windowsill, when Maria appeared in the doorway with an expression that made Yosef's stomach drop. Mr. Clay needs to see you in his office, Maria said, her voice carefully neutral in the way that meant something was very wrong. Immediately, Yosef glanced at Renly, who looked up with worried eyes, already sensing the shift in atmosphere. I will be right back. Sweetheart, keep working on your rock garden, and I want to see what you create. All right? The boy nodded reluctantly, and Yosef followed Maria through hallways that suddenly felt too long, too quiet. They descended a set of stairs she had not explored before, leading to the lower level where Cassidy conducted his business. The change in atmosphere was palpable. This was not the warm, lived-in space of the upper floors. This was where the mafia boss worked, where decisions were made that shaped the violent world he inhabited. Dominic stood outside a heavy oak door, his expression more grim than usual. He did not speak as he opened it for her, but his eyes held a warning that made her pulse quicken. Cassidy's office was all dark wood and leather, lined with bookshelves and dominated by a massive desk that looked like it had witnessed decades of dangerous negotiations. But Yosef barely registered the decor. Her attention was fixed on Cassidy, who stood with his back to her, staring out the window with a rigidity that suggested violence barely contained. On the desk behind him sat a small cardboard box, innocuous and terrifying all at once. Cassidy, she said softly. He did not turn around immediately. When he did, the expression on his face made her breath catch. The careful control he always maintained had fractured, revealing something wild and barely leashed beneath. His jaw was clenched so hard she could see the muscle jumping, and his hands were curled into fists at his sides. Vincent Moretti sent you a gift, he said, his voice dangerously quiet. I need you to look at it, but I need you to understand something first. What is in that box is a message meant to terrify you. It is meant to show you that nowhere is safe, that he can reach you anywhere. And I need you to know that he is lying. Yosef moved closer to the desk, her heart hammering against her ribs. What is it? Look for yourself, Cassidy said, though every line of his body suggested he would rather burn the entire box than let her see its contents. With trembling hands, Yosef lifted the lid. Inside was a collection of photographs, dozens of them, arranged with meticulous care. Her apartment building, taken from across the street. The diner where she had worked, captured during her evening shift. Her walking to the bus stop, caught in profile with her hair pulled back. Her sitting alone at a cafe, drinking coffee on what must have been her day off. Image after image, documenting her life with the precision of someone who had been watching her for weeks, possibly months. Beneath the photos was a single card, embossed with elegant script that made the threat feel even more obscene. You cannot hide what I have already found, Vincent Moretti. Yosef's hands went numb, and the photographs slipped from her fingers, scattering across the desk like evidence of her complete vulnerability. He was watching me, she whispered. Before the shooting, he knew who I was. No, Cassidy said immediately, moving to her side and gripping her shoulders, forcing her to look at him. He did not know who you were before. He is implying that he did to make you believe you were always a target, that this was inevitable. But these photos were taken in the days after the shooting, after his people identified you from security footage. He is trying to make you feel helpless. But Yosef could barely hear him over the roaring in her ears. My apartment, the diner. How did he find those places so quickly? Because he has resources, Cassidy admitted, his voice tight with fury. Because he has people embedded throughout this city who can track someone down with a name and a face. It took his organization less than 48 hours to compile your entire life into a dossier. Yosef pulled away from him, wrapping her arms around herself as the full weight of her situation crashed down on her. So he knows where I lived, where I worked, everyone I knew. She looked up at Cassidy, fear sharp in her chest. Mrs. Chen, my landlord, Tony at the diner. Are they in danger because of me? I already have people watching them, Cassidy said. The moment we identified you at the hospital, I put surveillance on anyone connected to your life. They are safe. Moretti has no reason to touch them. You are the only one he wants. Why? Yosef demanded, her voice breaking. I am nobody. I am just a waitress who happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. Why does he care enough to do this? Cassidy was silent for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice carried a weight that made her understand the true depth of the danger she was in. Because you saved my son. Because in doing so, you proved something that Vincent has been trying to disprove for 2 years, that I still have weaknesses, that I can still care about someone enough for them to be used against me. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. He sees me as your weakness, Yosef said slowly, understanding dawning with cold clarity. He sees you as my vulnerability, Cassidy corrected, moving closer again. Because he watched me kneel beside you on that marble floor and refused to leave your side. Because he knows I moved heaven and earth to get the best surgeons to save your life. Because he understands that you have become important to me in a way that makes you a target. Yosef stared at him, seeing the truth written in every line of his face. You care about me. Yes, Cassidy said simply, no longer hiding behind carefully chosen words. I care about you. My son loves you. You have become part of this family in a matter of days. And Vincent knows that. He knows that hurting you would destroy Renly, and destroying Renly would destroy me. That is why he sent these photos. That is why he is making it clear that he knows everything about your life. He wants you to understand that staying with me makes you a permanent target. Yosef felt tears burning at the corners of her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. What am I supposed to do? Run? Hide? Spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder? No, Cassidy said, his voice hardening into something absolute and unyielding. You are supposed to let me protect you. You are supposed to trust that I will eliminate this threat before it can touch you. You are supposed to believe me when I tell you that Vincent Moretti will not lay a hand on you, because I will burn his entire organization to the ground before I let that happen. The intensity of his words, the barely controlled rage behind them, should have frightened her. But instead, Yosef felt something else, a strange sense of safety in knowing that this dangerous man had decided she was worth protecting at any cost. He killed your wife, she said quietly. The car bomb. That was Vincent, was it not? Cassidy's expression went dark, a shadow passing over his features. Yes. 2 years ago, Vincent declared war on my family by taking the person I loved most. He thought it would break me, make me weak and vulnerable. Instead, it made me ruthless. I have spent 2 years systematically dismantling his operations, taking his territory piece by piece, making him understand what it means to lose everything. And now he wants revenge, Yosef finished. Now he wants to finish what he started. Cassidy agreed. By taking the people I care about. First Renly, and when that failed, you, because he has figured out that you are not just a witness. You are someone who matters. Yosef looked down at the scattered photographs, at the evidence of her exposed life, and felt something shift inside her. The fear was still there, coiling in her stomach like a living thing. But beneath it was something else, a quiet fury at the man who thought he could terrorize her into submission, who believed she would break under the weight of his threats. What happens now? She asked, raising her eyes to meet Cassidy's. His expression softened slightly, and he reached out to cup her face, his thumb brushing away a tear she had not realized had fallen. Now I make sure Vincent understands that touching you means his death. Now I stop playing defense and start taking this fight to him. And now you decide if you trust me enough to stand beside me while I do it. Yosef leaned into his touch, drawing strength from the solid warmth of his hand against her cheek. I trust you, she said, and realized with surprise that she meant it. This man, this dangerous, complicated man who had pulled her into his world and refused to let her go, had somehow earned her trust in the space between saving his son and protecting her from the consequences. Then let me keep you safe, Cassidy whispered. Let me be the monster the world believes I am, so that you and Renly can sleep at night without fear. And Yosef, standing in that dark office with photographs of her stolen life scattered across the desk, understood that she had already made her choice. 3 days after Vincent's package arrived, Cassidy summoned Yosef to his study after Renly had fallen asleep. She found him standing behind his desk, backlit by the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the estate's grounds. The room felt heavier tonight, charged with the weight of decisions that could not be unmade. On the desk between them lay 2 folders, one thick and one thin, both closed. "Sit," Cassidy said, his voice carefully controlled in a way that told her this conversation had been rehearsed, planned, agonized over. "Please." Yosef settled into one of the leather chairs facing the desk, her hands folded in her lap to keep them from trembling. She had known this moment was coming. The past 3 days had been filled with increased security, hushed phone conversations behind closed doors, and the constant presence of Dominic's men moving through the house like shadows preparing for war. Cassidy remained standing, his hands braced against the desk, his head bowed as if gathering strength for what he had to say. When he finally looked up, his gray eyes held a complexity of emotion that took her breath away: resignation, determination, and something that looked dangerously close to hope. "I have spent the last 72 hours consulting with every contact I have in law enforcement, every ally in my organization, every person who owes me a favor," he began, "and I have come to understand that there are only 2 ways to keep you truly safe from Vincent Moretti." He pushed the thick folder toward her. "The first option is witness protection. The FBI has agreed to take your case, given that you are a witness to an attempted murder tied to organized crime. They will give you a new name, a new history, relocate you to a city where no one knows your face. You will disappear completely, and Vincent will never find you." Yosef stared at the folder, not touching it. "And the second option?" Cassidy's jaw tightened, and he pushed the thinner folder across the desk to rest beside the first. "You marry me." The words hung in the air between them, stark and impossible and somehow inevitable all at once. "In my world, there are rules," Cassidy continued, his voice steady despite the tension radiating from every line of his body. "Lines that even men like Vincent Moretti do not cross without declaring total war. A man's wife is untouchable. His children are untouchable. To harm them is to invite annihilation from every family, every organization, every code that keeps our world from complete chaos. If you become my wife, you become protected by centuries of tradition and violence. You become sacred ground that Vincent cannot tread on without signing his own death warrant." Yosef's hands clenched in her lap. "You want me to marry you to keep me safe. I want you to marry me because it is the only option that lets you keep your life," Cassidy corrected. "Witness protection means you lose everything: your name, your history, any chance of returning to the people you knew. You would be alone, constantly looking over your shoulder, never able to put down roots or build a real life. And you would never see Renly again." The last words hit her like a physical blow. She had not considered that part of the equation. Disappearing meant abandoning the boy who had wrapped himself around her heart in the space of 2 weeks. "And marriage means I stay here," Yosef said slowly. "In this house, in this world, surrounded by guards and violence and constant danger." "Yes," Cassidy admitted. "It means you become part of this family in every legal and binding way. It means you accept the protection of my name and everything that comes with it. The good and the terrible." Yosef reached for the thin folder and opened it. Inside was a marriage license, already partially filled out, waiting only for signatures and a date. Beneath it was a prenuptial agreement that she scanned quickly. It was shockingly generous, ensuring she would be financially secure even if the marriage ended, though the legal language made clear that divorce would be complicated by the very protections it provided. "This feels like a cage," she whispered. "It is," Cassidy said, his honesty brutal and somehow kind. "I will not lie to you and call it anything else. This is a cage built of necessity and tradition and rules older than either of us. But it is a cage where you keep your identity, where you can still be Yosef Rosario, who becomes Yosef Clay, where you can watch Renly grow up and be there when he finally speaks again, where you can have a life, even if it is not the life you would have chosen." Yosef closed the folder and looked up at him. "And what do you get out of this arrangement?" Something flickered across Cassidy's face: vulnerability, quickly masked but not quickly enough. "I get to keep my son from losing another person he loves. I get to fulfill the vow I made to protect you, and I get the peace of knowing that the woman who saved my child is safe from the man who killed my wife." "That is not an answer," Yosef pressed. "What do you want, Cassidy?" He was silent for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was rough with an emotion he did not try to hide. "I want you to stay. Not because I am forcing you, not because you owe me anything, but because in 2 weeks, you have become essential to this family in a way I did not think was possible. You have given my son hope. You have brought light into a house that has been dark for 2 years. And selfishly, impossibly, I want to keep that light here. Yosef felt tears burning at the corners of her eyes. She thought of her mother's funeral, standing alone at the graveside because there had been no one else left. She had been alone for so long, carrying her grief and her debts and her exhaustion like stones in her pockets, slowly drowning under the weight of a life that had offered her nothing but struggle. And now she was being offered something different. A cage, yes, but also a family, a child who needed her, a man who looked at her like she was something precious and breakable and worth protecting at any cost. If I agree to this, Yosef said slowly, I need you to understand something. I will not be a wife in name only. I will not be a performance or a legal shield or a convenient solution to a problem. If I marry you, Cassidy Clay, it will be real, in every way that matters. Cassidy's eyes widened slightly, surprise breaking through his careful control. What are you saying? I am saying that I will not live in a marriage that is only a transaction, Yosef said, her voice growing stronger. I lost too much already to settle for half a life. If I stay, if I take your name and accept your protection, then I want a real partnership. I want to be a mother to Renly in truth, not just in practice. And I want you to see me as a wife, not as an obligation you are fulfilling. She stood, moving around the desk until she was directly in front of him, close enough to see the pulse jumping in his throat, the slight tremor in his hands that he was trying to control. I know you loved your first wife, she continued. I know you probably still love her. And I am not asking you to replace her or forget her, but I am asking that if we do this, we do it honestly. No pretending, no performance. A real marriage, even if it started for all the wrong reasons. Cassidy stared at her, and she watched something shift in his expression calculation, giving way to something rawer, more genuine. You are asking me to give you a real chance at happiness, even in this situation. I am asking you to let me try to build something real from these broken pieces, Yosef said, because I think you want that too, even if you are afraid to admit it. He reached up slowly, cupping her face in his hands, his thumbs tracing her cheekbones with a gentleness that contradicted everything the world believed about him. You terrify me, Yosef Rosario. You walk into my life through bullets and blood, and in 2 weeks, you have become someone I cannot imagine losing. That kind of caring is dangerous in my world. Then be dangerous with me, Yosef whispered. Marry me for real, not just for protection. Choose me, and let me choose you back. Cassidy's forehead dropped to rest against hers, his breath shaky. If I do this, if I let myself care about you the way I am already beginning to, I will burn down the entire world to keep you safe. Good, Yosef said, because I am going to need someone that committed when I become the wife of a mafia boss. A sound escaped him, something between a laugh and a sob, and then his lips were on hers, desperate and gentle and full of promises neither of them could speak aloud. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Cassidy pressed his forehead to hers again. Yes, he whispered, real, in every way that matters. I choose you, Yosef, and I will spend the rest of my life proving that this was more than just protection. Yosef smiled through her tears and picked up a pen from the desk. Then let us make it official. And together, they signed their names on the license, binding themselves to each other in a marriage born of necessity but, perhaps, destined to become something far more powerful than either of them had imagined. The chapel on the Clay estate was small and intimate, built by Cassidy's grandfather decades ago when the family still pretended at respectability. Stained glass windows filtered morning light into jeweled patterns across worn wooden pews, and the scent of white roses filled the air. Maria had transformed the space overnight, draping cream silk and arranging flowers with the efficiency of someone who understood that beauty could exist even in the shadow of violence. Yosef stood in the small preparation room adjacent to the chapel, staring at her reflection in the antique mirror. The dress Maria had procured was simpler than she had expected, ivory silk that fell in clean lines to the floor, elegant without being ostentatious. It fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting for her. But the only adornment that truly mattered hung at her throat. Her mother's silver necklace, delicate and worn, the single pendant catching the light. She had worn it at her mother's funeral, and now she wore it to her wedding, carrying the memory of the woman who had loved her into this new, impossible life. You look beautiful, Maria said from the doorway, her eyes suspiciously bright. Your mother would be proud. Yosef touched the necklace, her fingers trembling slightly. I hope so. I am marrying a man I have known for 2 weeks to protect myself from a crime boss who wants me dead. It is not exactly the fairy tale she dreamed of for me. Fairy tales are overrated, Maria said with a knowing smile. I have worked for Mr. Clay for 10 years. I have seen him at his worst and his best, and I have never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you. Not even her. The unspoken name hung between them. Cassidy's first wife, the ghost that haunted these halls, the woman whose death had carved out pieces of the man Yosef was about to marry. He loved her, Yosef said quietly. He did, Maria agreed. But that love died with her 2 years ago. What he feels for you is different. Raw and new and terrifying for a man who thought he would never feel anything again. Give it time, and I think you will find something real here. Before Yosef could respond, a soft knock interrupted them. Renly appeared in the doorway wearing a small black suit that made him look impossibly grown up and heartbreakingly young all at once. He had been unusually animated this morning, using his makeshift sign language to communicate his excitement, and now he held a small bouquet of wildflowers he had picked from the garden with Maria's help. He crossed to Yosef and held them out, his gray eyes solemn and hopeful. She knelt carefully, mindful of her dress, and accepted the flowers. "Thank you, sweetheart," she whispered. "They are perfect." Renly's hands moved in the gestures she had learned to read. "You are staying. You are not leaving us." "I am staying," Yosef confirmed, her voice thick with emotion. "I promise." The boy threw his arms around her neck, holding tight, and Yosef understood that this marriage was not just about protecting herself or fulfilling Cassidy's vow. It was about this child who had already lost one mother and desperately needed to believe he would not lose another. When she entered the chapel minutes later, her arm linked through Dominic's, the closest thing to family Cassidy could provide on short notice, she was struck by the strange congregation that had gathered. These were not wedding guests in any traditional sense. They were soldiers and capos, lieutenants and consiglieri, men whose tailored suits concealed weapons and whose faces bore the marks of lives lived in shadows. They stood as she passed, not out of respect for a bride, but because she was about to become their boss's wife, which made her untouchable by every law that governed their world. Cassidy waited at the altar beside a priest who looked uncomfortable but resigned, as if he had officiated marriages like this before and knew better than to refuse. But Yosef barely registered the priest or the watching men, or even the opulence of the chapel. Her entire focus narrowed to the man in the black suit whose eyes tracked her every step with an intensity that made her breath catch. He looked different today, still dangerous, still controlled, but with something softer in his expression, vulnerability mixed with determination, fear tangled with hope. When she reached him, he took her hand, his tattooed fingers wrapping around hers with a gentleness that contradicted everything he represented to the world. "You are sure?" he murmured, low enough that only she could hear. "Last chance to run." "I do not run," Yosef replied, squeezing his hand. "Not anymore." The ceremony was brief, stripped of unnecessary flourishes. The priest rushed through the traditional words, clearly eager to finish his role in this particular union. But when it came time for the vows, Cassidy turned to face her fully, his hands holding hers, and spoke with a conviction that silenced the room. "I vow to protect you with everything I have and everything I am," he said, his voice steady and absolute. "I vow to honor the choice you have made to stand beside me, even knowing what that means. I vow to be worthy of the trust you have placed in me, and to give you a life that is more than just survival. This I swear, Yosef Rosario, on my life and my son's future." The traditional vows, altered to fit the truth of what they were building together, and when Yosef spoke her own words, looking into those storm-gray eyes that had become familiar in such a short time, she meant every syllable. "I vow to stand beside you, not behind you. I vow to protect Renly as if he were my own son. I vow to be honest with you, even when the truth is difficult. And I vow to build something real with you from these broken pieces, because I believe we both deserve a chance at happiness. This I swear, Cassidy Clay, on everything I have left to give." Cassidy's eyes glistened, and for a moment, she thought he might actually cry. Instead, he reached into his pocket and withdrew a ring, not a gaudy display of wealth, but a delicate band of white gold with small diamonds embedded in an intricate pattern. "This belonged to my grandmother," he said softly as he slid it onto her finger. "Not to my first wife. I want you to wear something that represents a new beginning, not a replacement. And I promise you, Yosef, that I will make you happy if you will let me." The ring fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting for her hand. Yosef looked down at it, then back up at Cassidy, and saw her own tentative hope reflected in his face. "You may kiss your bride," the priest said quickly, already closing his book. Cassidy cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing her cheekbones, and kissed her with a tenderness that belied his reputation. It was not the desperate kiss from his study, but something softer, more reverent, a promise sealed with lips rather than words. When they pulled apart, he pressed his forehead to hers. "My wife," he whispered, testing the words. "My husband," Yosef replied, and felt something settle in her chest, a rightness she had not expected. The reception that followed was held in the mansion's formal dining room, transformed into something almost festive despite the undercurrent of tension that permeated everything. Yosef sat beside Cassidy at the head table, Renly on her other side, and watched as men came forward to offer congratulations that felt more like pledges of loyalty. Each one understood what this marriage meant, that she was now protected by every alliance Cassidy had built, every oath these men had sworn. But as the evening wore on, Yosef became increasingly aware of what was missing. No one spoke his name, but Vincent Moretti's absence was a presence all its own, hanging over the celebration like a storm cloud. Every man in the room knew that this marriage was a declaration of war, a line drawn that Vincent would have to respond to or lose face entirely. Cassidy must have sensed her tension because he leaned close, his hand covering hers. "He knows," he murmured against her ear. "By now, Vincent has heard that you are my wife, and he understands what that means." "What does it mean?" Yosef asked, though she thought she knew the answer. "It means the rules have changed," Cassidy said, his voice hardening. "It means if he comes after you now, he is not just attacking a witness, he is attacking my family, and that is a war he cannot win." Yosef looked around the room at the dangerous men celebrating their union, at Renly, who had fallen asleep against her shoulder, at the husband whose ring now circled her finger. She had walked into a world of violence and power, had married a man she barely knew to survive. But as Cassidy's hand tightened around hers and his eyes promised protection and something that looked dangerously like love, Yosef understood that she had not just found safety, she had found a reason to fight back. The first week of marriage was strange in ways Yosef had not anticipated. There were no dramatic declarations or sweeping romantic gestures. Instead, there was a quiet settling, like two puzzle pieces discovering they fit together despite coming from entirely different pictures. Cassidy did not pressure her to share his bedroom, instead giving her space to adjust while making it clear the invitation remained open whenever she was ready. They existed in a peculiar intimacy, married, but still learning the basic geography of each other's lives. It was on the 8th night, unable to sleep, that Yosef found herself wandering down to Cassidy's office at nearly 2 in the morning. Light spilled from beneath the door, and she knocked softly before entering. He sat behind his desk, still dressed despite the late hour, papers spread before him and a glass of whiskey within reach. He looked up when she entered, surprise flickering across his features before settling into something warmer. "Cannot sleep?" he asked, already reaching for a second glass. "Too quiet," Yosef admitted, settling into the chair across from him. "I spent 2 years working night shifts. My body does not know what to do with peaceful evenings." Cassidy poured her a small measure of whiskey and slid it across the desk. "I rarely sleep before 3. Old habits from when staying awake meant staying alive." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, sipping their drinks, before Yosef asked the question that had been circling her mind for days. "Tell me about her, your first wife. Everyone tiptoes around the subject, but if we are building something real, I need to know who you were before." Cassidy's jaw tightened, but he did not deflect. "Elena. Her name was Elena Moretti, before she married me and became Elena Clay." Yosef nearly choked on her whiskey. "Moretti? As in, Vincent's younger sister," Cassidy confirmed, his voice heavy with old pain. "We married young, when there was still hope that our families could unite rather than destroy each other. She was the bridge that was supposed to bring peace. Instead, she became a casualty when that bridge burned." "Vincent killed his own sister?" Yosef's voice was barely a whisper. "The bomb was meant for me," Cassidy said, staring into his glass. "Elena was not supposed to be in the car. She had forgotten her phone and went back for it. Vincent claimed it was an accident, that he never intended for her to die. But intention does not matter when your sister is scattered across 3 city blocks because you were too impatient to wait for a clean shot." The rawness in his voice made Yosef's chest ache. "And Renly? He was 5, old enough to understand his mother was gone, but too young to process that she was never coming back. He stopped speaking 3 days after the funeral, Every therapist I consulted said it was trauma, that he would speak when he felt safe again. But how do you make a child feel safe when the world proved it could take everything in an instant? Yosef reached across the desk and took his hand. You keep trying. You surround him with people who love him. You give him a home where he can heal at his own pace. You do exactly what you have been doing. Cassidy's fingers tightened around hers. And what about you? What are you running from in those sleepless hours? Yosef took a shaky breath. My mother was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer 3 weeks before my 24th birthday. The doctors said 6 months. She lasted 14, fighting every day even when the pain was unbearable. I worked 3 jobs trying to keep up with medical bills that insurance refused to cover. I watched her waste away while drowning in debt I could never hope to pay off. The bills Dominic found when he investigated your background, Cassidy said quietly. $73,000. Yosef confirmed. For 14 months of watching someone I loved suffer. She died alone in a hospital room because I was at work, trying to earn enough to keep her comfortable for 1 more week. I was not there to hold her hand. I was serving coffee to strangers while she took her last breath. Cassidy stood and rounded the desk, pulling Yosef to her feet and into his arms. She let herself collapse against his chest, the tears she had been holding back for weeks finally breaking free. He held her tightly, one hand cradling the back of her head, and said nothing, because sometimes there were no words that could heal old wounds, only presence and understanding and the knowledge that someone else saw your pain and did not turn away from it. Those bills are gone, Cassidy said after her tears had subsided. I paid them off the day after our wedding. You are not carrying that debt anymore. Yosef pulled back to look at him. Cassidy, that is too much. You are my wife, he interrupted gently. Your burdens are my burdens now, and I will not have you carrying guilt over money that should never have been your responsibility in the first place. Something cracked open in Yosef's chest, a wall she had built around her heart to survive her mother's death and the crushing loneliness that followed. Thank you, she whispered. Come, Cassidy said, taking her hand. If neither of us can sleep, we might as well be together. They fell into a pattern after that night. Yosef would wander down to his office when sleep eluded her, and they would talk for hours about everything and nothing. She learned about his childhood as the heir to an empire he never asked for, about the weight of expectations and violence that shaped him. He learned about her years in foster care before her mother finally got custody, about the fierce independence she had cultivated because she learned early that no one else would save her. They learned to read each other's silences when quiet meant contentment and when it meant spiraling into dark memories. Cassidy discovered that Yosef was secretly terrible at poker but brilliant at chess. Yosef discovered that the fearsome mafia boss sang off-key Italian lullabies to his son every night and could make pancakes shaped like dinosaurs. During the day, Renly became the bridge that connected them. The boy had taken to drawing obsessively, filling sketchbooks with images that told stories his voice could not. And increasingly, those drawings featured 3 figures, a man with dark hair and tattoos, a woman with kind eyes, and a small boy holding both their hands. He drew them at dinner tables and in gardens, at the beach and in imaginary castles, always together, always a unit. Maria and the household staff had begun referring to Yosef as Mrs. Clay, with a respect that went beyond her legal title. They saw how she had transformed the house, bringing warmth back into spaces that had felt cold and empty for 2 years. They watched Cassidy smile more readily, saw the tension ease from his shoulders when she entered a room, and they understood that this marriage, however unusual its origins, was becoming something real. But as the 2nd week became the 3rd, and the 3rd became the 4th, a shadow began to creep back into their fragile peace. Cassidy spent increasing amounts of time in his office, phone calls growing more heated and frequent. Dominic's presence became more constant, and the number of guards patrolling the estate doubled, then tripled. Yosef found Cassidy in his office late one evening, staring at surveillance photos spread across his desk. She recognized the location immediately, the waterfront, specifically the abandoned warehouses that dotted the industrial district. What is happening? She asked, closing the door behind her. Cassidy looked up, and the fear in his eyes made her stomach drop. Vincent is moving. My contacts report unusual activity in his organization. Money being moved, alliances being called in. He is planning something, and every instinct I have is screaming that it is going to be big. And you think he is coming after us? Yosef said. Not a question. I know he is coming after us, Cassidy corrected, his voice tight. The marriage was a message. He has to respond. or he loses credibility with every family watching this play out. But I cannot figure out how or when, and that terrifies me. Yosef moved to his side, placing her hand on his shoulder. Then we face it together. That is what partners do, right? We do not hide from the storm. We stand in it and dare it to break us. Cassidy turned and pulled her into his lap, burying his face in her hair. I cannot lose you, he whispered. I cannot lose either of you. Not when I have just found something worth protecting. Then we make sure Vincent does not win, Yosef said, wrapping her arms around him. We trust Dominic and your security. We trust each other, and we do whatever it takes to protect our family. Our family. The words hung between them, transforming from aspiration to declaration, and as Cassidy held her close, Yosef understood that they had crossed an invisible threshold. They were no longer two broken people bound by necessity. They were becoming something stronger. Something that Vincent Moretti would discover was far more dangerous than he had anticipated. The call came at 7 in the evening, just as Yosef was helping Renly finish a drawing of a dragon protecting a castle. Cassidy's phone buzzed on the dining room table where they had gathered for an early dinner, and she watched his expression shift from casual to intense in the space of a heartbeat. He stood abruptly, already moving toward his office as he answered, his voice clipped and businesslike. Yosef exchanged a glance with Maria, who had frozen in the doorway with a serving dish. The housekeeper's face was tight with worry, and Yosef felt her own stomach clench with dread. She squeezed Renly's shoulder reassuringly and followed Cassidy, ignoring the boy's questioning look. She found Cassidy in his office with Dominic, both men hunched over the speakerphone on the desk. A voice she did not recognize was speaking, measured and professional, like a lawyer negotiating a contract rather than arranging a meeting between deadly enemies. Mr. Moretti is willing to meet at a neutral location to discuss terms, the voice said. He understands that the current situation is unsustainable for both families. He proposes a truce, formalized under the observation of the 5 Families Council. Cassidy's hands were braced against the desk, his knuckles white. What location? Warehouse 12 at the Port Authority docks. Abandoned neutral ground, no surveillance infrastructure that either party controls. Tomorrow at midnight, Mr. Moretti will bring 3 men. You may bring the same. The line went dead, and silence fell over the office like a suffocating blanket. It is a trap, Dominic said immediately, his voice flat and certain. Vincent does not negotiate. He destroys. I know, Cassidy replied, but Yosef heard the desperate hope underneath his words. But what if it is not? What if he has finally realized that killing my family will bring down every alliance he has left? What if there is a chance to end this without more bloodshed? You are not thinking clearly, Dominic pressed. This is exactly what he wants to draw you out from your defenses into a location he has chosen. It is a kill box, Cassidy. And if I refuse, he will interpret it as weakness. Cassidy shot back. He will escalate, and the next attempt will not be against me. It will be against Yosef or Renly. I cannot sit behind these walls and wait for him to find a crack in our armor. Yosef's blood ran cold. You are going to meet him. Cassidy finally looked at her, and the conflict in his eyes made her chest ache. I have to try. For us. For Renly. If there is even a chance that Vincent will accept a truce. There is not, Yosef interrupted, moving closer. Cassidy, he killed his own sister to get to you. Do you really believe he will suddenly agree to peace? No, Cassidy admitted, his voice breaking slightly. But I believe I have to try anyway. Because the alternative is living like this forever, waiting for the moment he strikes. I will not raise my son in fear. I will not watch you look over your shoulder for the rest of your life. Before Yosef could argue further, Cassidy pulled her close and kissed her forehead. I need you to promise me something. If this goes wrong, if I do not come back, you take Renly and you run. Dominic will have everything arranged. New identities. Accounts that Vincent cannot trace. You disappear and you live. Do not talk like that, Yosef said fiercely, gripping his shirt. You are coming back. Promise me, Cassidy insisted, his gray eyes boring into hers. I promise, she lied, because she would never run and leave him to face Vincent alone. The next day crawled by with agonizing slowness. Cassidy spent hours in meetings with his advisors, planning contingencies and backup strategies. Dominic assembled a team of his best men, all of them grim-faced and heavily armed. Yosef tried to maintain normalcy for Renly's sake, but the boy sensed the tension and clung to her throughout the day, his drawings growing darker and more chaotic. As 11 o'clock approached, Cassidy came to say goodbye. He found Yosef in the security room where she had stationed herself, unable to stay away from the monitors that would show his convoy's progress. He pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly. "I love you," he said, the words raw and unguarded. "I should have said it sooner, should have admitted it when I first realized, but I was afraid. I am not afraid anymore. I love you, Yosef Clay." Tears burned in Yosef's eyes. "I love you too. So come back to me. Come back to us." One last kiss, desperate and fierce, and then he was gone. Yosef watched the convoy of 3 black SUVs pull away from the estate, her hands pressed against the monitor screen as if she could somehow keep him safe through sheer force of will. Dominic stayed behind, a decision that had sparked a bitter argument between him and Cassidy. But someone had to protect the estate, had to ensure Yosef and Renly remained safe if this was indeed the distraction Vincent needed to strike at the mansion. The vehicles reached the docks at 11:45. Yosef watched them park in a semicircle outside Warehouse 12, watched Cassidy and his 3 men emerge and approach the building. The camera feeds were limited, just the external Port Authority cameras that Dominic had managed to access remotely. But it was enough to see the warehouse, its rusted metal walls and broken windows, the single door that Cassidy disappeared through at precisely midnight. And then Yosef's blood turned to ice. She knew this warehouse. She had delivered catering orders to the foreman's office in the adjacent building during her time working for the catering company. She knew the layout, knew that Warehouse 12 was a death trap with only one functioning exit. The rear doors had been welded shut after a safety inspection, and the side access was blocked by collapsed shelving. "Dominic," she said, her voice cutting through the tense silence of the security room. "That warehouse only has one way out. The door they just walked through is the only exit." Dominic's head snapped toward her. "What?" "I used to deliver to this dock," Yosef explained, her words coming faster as panic set in. "Warehouse 12 failed inspection 3 years ago. They sealed all the exits except the main entrance because the building was scheduled for demolition. If Vincent has men inside, Cassidy just walked into a cage." On the monitor, she saw movement figures emerging from the shadows around the warehouse perimeter. 10, 15, 20 men, all armed, all closing in on the single exit. "He is trapped," Yosef whispered. "Vincent has him trapped." Dominic was already on his phone, barking orders to the team accompanying Cassidy, but the response made his face go pale. "Jammer. They are running a signal jammer. Our team cannot communicate. They are going in blind." Yosef did not think. She grabbed Dominic's arm and said, "Take me there, now." "Absolutely not," Dominic said. "My orders are to keep you here where you are safe. Your boss is about to die in an ambush because he walked into a trap trying to protect me," Yosef interrupted, her voice steel. "I know that warehouse. I know the layout. And I can help. So either take me there or give me a car and I will drive myself." Dominic stared at her for a long moment, and she saw the calculation in his eyes weighing his orders against the reality that Cassidy needed help and she was offering knowledge they did not have. "The emergency kit?" Yosef said suddenly, remembering. "From the car. Do you still have emergency road flares?" "In the garage," Dominic confirmed, confused. "Get them," Yosef ordered. "If we cannot shoot our way in, we will blind them and signal Cassidy's backup team. Those flares burn at 3,000 degrees and produce enough light to disorient anyone looking at them directly." Something shifted in Dominic's expression, recognition that she was thinking tactically, that she was not a liability but potentially an asset. "You are insane," he said. "I am a wife trying to save her husband," Yosef corrected. "Now move." 5 minutes later, they were in an unmarked SUV racing toward the docks, a case of emergency flares in the back seat and Dominic on the phone coordinating with backup units. Yosef's hands shook as she loaded flares into her pockets, the only weapons she had any idea how to use. She was not a fighter, had never fired a gun, had no training in combat or tactics, but she knew how to protect people she loved. She had learned that lesson when she threw herself in front of bullets meant for a child, and tonight, she would learn it again. The SUV screeched to a halt 3 blocks from the warehouse, close enough to reach on foot but far enough to avoid immediate detection. Yosef could hear the gunfire before she even opened the door, sharp cracks echoing across the water, punctuated by the deeper boom of shotguns. Dominic was out first, weapon drawn, his eyes scanning the darkness with professional efficiency. "Stay behind me," he ordered. But Yosef was already moving, the case of flares clutched against her chest like a shield. They approached from the south side, using shipping containers as cover. Vincent's men were concentrated near the main entrance, exactly as Yosef had predicted. They had Cassidy's team pinned inside the warehouse, firing in controlled bursts while gradually tightening the circle. It was not a battle. It was an execution in progress. Yosef's hands shook as she pulled the first flare from the case, remembering the instructions from the safety demonstration at her old catering job. Strike the cap, aim away from your body, and shield your eyes from the initial burst. She had used them once to mark a delivery truck that had broken down on a dark highway. Now she was using them as weapons. When I light these, your backup team will see them from 2 miles away, Yosef said to Dominic, her voice steadier than she felt. But Vincent's men will be temporarily blinded if we aim for their position. We will have maybe 30 seconds before they recover and reposition. Dominic looked at her with something approaching respect. On my signal, and stay low. Yosef struck the first flare and hurled it high toward the cluster of men near the entrance. It arced through the darkness like a falling star and landed 15 feet from the nearest shooter, erupting in a brilliant red cascade that turned night into day. The men shouted, turning away from the searing light, hands rising to shield their eyes. She lit the second flare and threw it further, creating a wall of burning magnesium between Vincent's forces and the warehouse entrance. Then the third, and the fourth, until the entire dock was illuminated in a harsh crimson light that painted everything in shades of blood and fire. Dominic moved the moment the confusion started, firing precisely at targets silhouetted against the flares. Yosef heard engines roaring in the distance, backup arriving, drawn by the brilliant beacons she had created. Vincent's men were scrambling now, caught between the unexpected light show and the approaching reinforcements, their carefully planned ambush dissolving into chaos. Yosef did not wait for permission. She ran toward the warehouse entrance, keeping low, another flare clutched in her hand. She heard Dominic shouting behind her, but she was already through the door, into the darkness beyond the ring of light. Inside, the warehouse was a maze of shadows and gunfire. She could see muzzle flashes near the back, could hear Cassidy's voice shouting orders to his men. She lit her last flare and held it high, and in the sudden wash of red light, she saw him. Cassidy was pressed against a support beam, his left shoulder dark with blood, his weapon raised as he provided covering fire for 2 of his men who were pinned behind overturned machinery. His face was pale with pain and fury, and when the flare light hit him, his head snapped toward her. Their eyes met across the warehouse floor, and everything else fell away. In that instant, Yosef saw recognition, saw disbelief that she was there, saw terror that she had put herself in danger, and underneath it all, saw a love so profound it took her breath away. "Yosef!" Cassidy's voice was raw. "What the hell are you?" His words were cut off by the thunder of Dominic's team storming the warehouse, their arrival perfectly timed with the flare signals. Vincent's men, caught between forces and blinded by the continuing burn of the flares outside, began to fall back. Some dropped their weapons in surrender. Others fled into the maze of docks, pursued by Cassidy's reinforcements. Yosef ran to Cassidy, and he caught her with his good arm, crushing her against his chest despite the blood seeping through his jacket. "You came for me," he said, his voice breaking. "You insane, brave, impossible woman. You came for me." "Of course I came for you," Yosef said, tears streaming down her face. "You are my husband. Did you think I would just sit at home and wait to become a widow?" Cassidy laughed, a sound caught between joy and pain, and kissed her fiercely. Around them, the battle was ending. Vincent's forces either captured or scattered. Dominic appeared at their side, already on the phone, coordinating cleanup and calling for medical assistance. "Vincent?" Cassidy asked, still holding Yosef tight. "Fled before we arrived," Dominic reported grimly. "But we captured 8 of his men and seized documentation that will destroy his remaining alliances. This was his last play, and it failed. He has nothing left." Cassidy nodded, swaying slightly, and Yosef realized he had lost more blood than she had initially thought. "We need to get you to a hospital," she said urgently. "I am not leaving until every one of my men is accounted for," Cassidy insisted, stubborn even in his weakened state. "Then I am not leaving either," Yosef replied, matching his stubbornness with her own. 3 days later, Yosef sat beside Cassidy's hospital bed in the private wing he had occupied once before when he had kept vigil over her. The bullet had done damage, but nothing permanent, and the doctors assured her he would recover fully with rest. Rest, however, was something Cassidy Clay had never been particularly good at. Renly sat on the other side of the bed, his small hand clutching his father's, his drawing pad abandoned on his lap. He had been unusually quiet since Cassidy had been brought in, his eyes too large in his small face. clearly remembering another hospital room where his mother had never woken up. "I am all right, son," Cassidy said gently, squeezing the boy's hand. "A scratch, nothing more. I will be home in a few days." Renly's eyes moved to Yosef, questioning, needing confirmation from the woman who had become his anchor. "He is telling the truth," Yosef assured the boy. "Your father is too stubborn to let something like a bullet keep him down." Cassidy turned his head to look at her, his gray eyes soft with an emotion that still took her breath away. "I need to tell you something," he said. "Something I should have admitted weeks ago." "Cassidy," Yosef started, but he shook his head. "The moment I fell in love with you," he continued, "was not at our wedding. It was not even during those late-night conversations in my office. It was in the hospital, when you first opened your eyes after surgery. Do you remember what you said?" Yosef felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes. "Is the boy safe? Is the boy safe?" Cassidy repeated, his voice thick with emotion. "You had just been shot. You had lost enough blood to kill most people. You were in pain and confused and barely conscious. And your first words were not about yourself, not a question about where you were or what had happened. You asked if my son was safe. In that moment, I knew you were someone extraordinary, someone worth protecting, someone worth loving. I stopped feeling like I was just surviving," Yosef confessed, taking his hand. "When I started fighting for you, for both of you. My whole life, I was just trying to get through each day, carrying my mother's debt and my guilt and my loneliness. But here, in this dangerous, impossible situation, I found something I thought I had lost forever. I found a reason to fight, not just to survive. I found a family worth protecting at any cost." Cassidy pulled her close with his good arm, pressing his forehead to hers. "We are going to have a real life together. Not just survival, not just protection. Real happiness, real peace. I promise you." And then, in the space between their whispered promises, a small voice spoke, a voice that had been silent for 2 years, carrying words that changed everything. "You are my mom now." Both Cassidy and Yosef froze, then turned to stare at Renly. The boy was looking at Yosef with eyes that were no longer haunted by silence, but shining with tentative hope and absolute certainty. "You are my mom now," Renly repeated, his voice gaining strength. "You saved me. You saved Dad. You are our family." Yosef could not speak, could not breathe through the overwhelming wave of emotion that crashed over her. She reached for Renly and pulled him into her arms, and Cassidy wrapped both of them in his embrace, the three of them holding each other in that hospital room while tears flowed freely. "Yes," Yosef finally managed to say, her voice breaking with joy. "Yes, sweetheart, I am your mom, and you are my son, and we are a family." They stayed like that, wrapped in each other, a family forged in fire and blood and impossible choices, a family bound not by tradition or obligation, but by the conscious decision to protect and love each other against all odds. A family that had survived bullets and bombs and the machinations of evil men, and had emerged stronger on the other side. When they finally pulled apart, Cassidy was smiling through his tears, and Renly was chattering excitedly about all the things he wanted to tell them now that he could speak again. And Yosef, looking at her husband and her son, understood that she had not just found safety in Cassidy Clay's world. She had found home,